Our guest today is the congressman for the 7th Congressional District of Illinois. He has served in Congress for 17 years. Prior to his election to Congress, our guest today served 11 years in Chicago City Council and 6 years on the Cook County Board. Our guest today was born just down the road from President Bill Clinton in Parkdale, Arkansas. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Danny K. Davis.
Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate the applause that you gave Jay Doherty, because not only does he deserve applause, but Paul Green does also. Because anybody who can create and keep alive this kind of dialogue that Chicagoans and people in the metropolitan area of Illinois and throughout the state look forward to, and all kinds of distinguished individuals meet here and gather, and you know, sometimes they even become friends. So let me thank you, Jay. You know, as you was making the introduction, and anytime Parkdale, Arkansas gets mentioned, I can't help but be reminded of my father, who was a farmer, a sharecropper. And I remember one year he decided that he wanted to put his mule in the Kentucky Derby. And so I was a, young fella following along beside him and behind him. We made our way to Louisville, and we asked, can you tell us where we would register our mule? And the gentleman looked at my father and said, sir, now, I don't want you to accuse me of any kind of prejudice and that kind of stuff, but this really is a race for thoroughbreds. And we don't usually let mules in. And of course, if he did get in, he wouldn't have any chance of winning. And so, why are you here? And my father says, well, I appreciate conversation, but I already knew the plight of my mule. But I really wanted him to know what it felt like to be in such good company. And seeing all of you who are the leaders of business, of industry, of politics and government, and ordinary citizens who helped to make Chicago and the state of Illinois one of the most interesting and most exciting places in the country. And so I'm delighted to be here and be in your company. And I think I might feel just like that mule felt when he got the opportunity to at least be at the Kentucky Derby. I'd like to spend a few minutes touching on three things. One is what's going on nationally in terms of our national government, few things about the state, and then what's taking place locally, and see how I feel about those. First of all, you need to know that I believe that in recent years, we have experienced one of the most difficult economic period in the history of our nation. No matter who would be in leadership and no matter at what levels. There are more people in our country who are unemployed than we've ever had in the history of the country. There have never, ever been as many people who've had difficult times finding meaningful employment as there are today. There have never been as many people incarcerated in our country. That is, individuals who are contained by state and local governments. And if you would really look at the people under the jurisdiction of our judicial correctional complex, you would find that there are 5 to 6 million people every day, not just counting those who are incarcerated, about 2.5 million, but those who are on probation, on parole, waiting for trial, are under some jurisdiction where they're just not free to move and act as they would like. That is part of the state. There are college graduates. When most of us graduated from college, we knew that we could just walk out with our sheepskin. Some of us graduated probably cum laude, summa cum laude, and then there were people like myself who graduated, thank you, Lottie, but we knew that there were jobs and work opportunities for us. Unfortunately, I gave a commencement address at a college not long ago, and I was having difficulty expressing to the young people that they were going to be able to access opportunities in their areas of preparation. And because I knew that some would, but many would not be able to, at least not at the moment. But I also needed to be able to express to them that there is always a sense of hope and possibility in our country. The poet probably would have said, you know, this was the best of times, but it's also the worst of times. And he would in all probability be correct on every account. I think of President Obama, who took office at a time in our country when we were on the verge of bankruptcy. I mean, there was tremendous fear across the nation that our economy was about to go belly up, that banks and financial institutions were struggling. We've had more mortgages that have been foreclosed on. People don't know what to do. We've had financial institutions, some of the great big ones. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine worked at one, and he found himself unemployed. An investment banker, kind of unheard of after the great stock market crash of '29 during that period. But to think that here is a high-powered investment banker trying to figure out how he's going to go out and continue to make money. Of course, he was able to do so, and he does quite well, but just the idea. In comes Barack Obama as president with some proposals that undergirded our economy in such a way that Chevrolet and Ford are now bouncing around, and Chrysler, and people were working. I remember going out to the Ford plant when they had one shift out on the southeast side of the city. Now they've got 3. They're working around the clock. I remember looking on my block when I saw many people with automobiles that had foreign automobile makers' names on them. Now I've seen a resurgence of Chevrolets and Fords and of Chryslers, and people are working, turning out these products and making money. I remember the president and his cabinet proposing that we rearrange some of our financial institutions and that they needed propping up. And we ended up bailing them out with big sums of money. Many people thought we should not do that, but some of us thought, well, let's take a chance. Let's invest. Let's reinvest. And guess what? That investment has paid off. These institutions are now thriving. Some of them have actually paid off the debt, the money that they borrowed. And so we put our institutional approach behind big business, while at the same time nurturing the growth and development of small businesses. I really didn't want to do it because many people in my congressional district, which is the most fascinating piece of geography in North America, you know, known as a political subdivision. You know, I get a chance to represent the folks downtown, folks on the Gold Coast, the Magnificent Mile, folks who are upcoming and upcomers, but I also get a chance to represent the folks out in North Lawndale, folks in Inglewood, the folks in East and West Garfield Park, and the tremendous western suburbs, you know, like Oak Park, where, you know, the great architect lived for a long time. As a matter of fact, Tarzan even lived out there. Ernest Hemingway had a little interaction with the area. And so it is great with tremendous institutions. And there are some people in the room who've been a part of this recovery of our nation. Just as the federal government has been saved, so has state government. You know, when Pat Quinn became governor, I said to myself, I would never want to be in this guy's shoes. I mean, that you just couldn't melt me and pull me down into Springfield as the head of the state of Illinois, you know, where we had one governor who had gone to jail, another governor was in waiting to go to jail, and we had a legislature that had powerful individual as well as collective forces. And here you come with no real base in either one of those bodies. Now you've got to try to carve out of that, and you've got to try and figure out a way to work with the most powerful individual politician in the state of Illinois, the Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan. But you still wanted to feel like you were the governor. And then and on the other side, there was Emil Jones, you know, who ended up being the president of the Senate. And so here are all these forces. I would imagine that every time Pat went home at night, he'd probably pray this prayer: "Oh Lord, please make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's disaffection, let me sow love." And let me try and get Emil and the Speaker to be on the same page at the same time, just as Barack Obama has had to try and do in Washington when you have a House divided. You know, we celebrated a whole lot of 50th anniversaries of things this year in relationship to civil rights and other kinds of things. And I guess it was the same kind of stuff that President Abraham Lincoln felt. When things didn't necessarily seem to be going right or the best, you know, during the Civil War, they losing wars, generals are drinking a whole lot of whiskey, and people aren't in agreement with strategy. And somebody asked Abraham Lincoln, say, you know, Mr. Lincoln, how is it that you can keep your sanity when all of these things are going on about you? Abraham Lincoln supposedly said, well, you know, when it comes to making these public decisions, I just do the best that I can. And if the end comes out all right, people will swear what a great person I am. He said, but if the end comes out wrong, a legion of angels swearing that I was right won't make one bit of difference. And so in the context of that, individuals and collections of individuals have had to determine what do they really philosophically believe in. Well, I am pleased to note that I come from a political party and a political group that believes in reinvestment for America. There are other groups that believe the opposite. They believe that we've got to be focused on deficit reduction. But I also believe that if you're going to start reducing deficits, the first thing you need to do is understand how we got to the deficit position. I've always been pleased to note that when my good friend from Hope, Arkansas, left office, we had a surplus. That is, the federal government had a surplus. And we were debating and discussing what is it that we are going to do with this surplus money that we have. And lo and behold, we got another president. President who decided that corporate income tax needed to be lowered. President who decided that we would go into some war activity, that we would go in some places and take out those weapons of mass destruction that we never found. And it takes a lot of money to wage war. I mean, you can have $1 million piece of equipment and one missile in a split second destroys that piece of equipment, and it's got to be remade. But even better than that, the real deal is that wars not only cost money, but they often cost lives and the destruction of lives, of people, of countries, of communities. And so I am so pleased that we've had some recent discussion where President Barack Obama decided that he would listen to people who said that we ought to find a way to negotiate some peace with some people in some other countries. And they may have some weapons, mass weapons of destruction, but let's make sure before we send our soldiers and troops and airplanes and armored vehicles in there and shoot up and destroy everything. And so we've had a kind of detente where diplomacy is trumping war efforts. And I commend him for that, because I've always felt that we could find, if we tried hard enough, peaceful solutions to some of the conflicts that exist in our world. And just as we can find them on a world order, we can also find them on a local order. We can find them on a state order. One of the big issues right now, of course, is education. How do we get the money? How do we find the resources to make sure that every young person growing up in this country have a good shot at equal educational opportunities? Or if they're not equal, at least have what they can access and afford. I look at the reinvention of the city college system under the leadership of Cheryl Hyman, and I must confess that I am intrigued with many of the things that they have done, especially their collaboration with healthcare institutions and business institutions, and helping young people know that there are some other ways to access a career and that the future can be bright for them if they apply themselves to the availability. I think of Chicago State when they were embroiled in a certain kind of turmoil. And I thought of Wayne Watson. Wayne and I went to Africa together in 1975. We were in Nairobi, Kenya. Wayne was a young graduate of Northwestern University, and I was actually a student at the time. That doesn't mean that I'm much younger than Wayne or anything like that. It just means he was the professor and I was in a study group, and we spent a month in East Africa But Wayne, of course, has come back and had a very distinguished career as the chancellor of the Chicago City Colleges, but also as the president of Chicago State University, where he has stabilized things there to a real degree. And my good friend Anthony Young is the chairman of the Board of Trustees, and I want to commend Governor Quinn for appointing Anthony to be the president. The trustees always vote and that kind of thing on whatever they do, but they also get a little help and a little direction, some recommendations and suggestions. And I've known Tony for a long time, and I'm very pleased to see that he is now the chairman, and that my good friend Spencer Leak is there and playing a very active role. So I commend the governor for those appointments. Things are looking brighter. Things are looking better. We've seen private sector job increase, and we've done private sector efforts. We've put resources in. Many people don't know it. They know that I do a lot of work on reentry, and they know that I do a lot of work on the human end of things and social work type things. But I was also very pleased when Richard Boykin and I were able to increase the authorization for the Access to Jobs program shortly after I went to Congress in a Republican-dominated environment, and got the authorization up from $195 million to $750 million, the only Democratic-sponsored amendment that year to the Access to Jobs programs, which took people out to suburban areas around the country where jobs were, from inner city communities where jobs were not. And Richard, I always appreciated your leadership and your work on that particular issue, because it was something that we were able to get done. I mentioned the fact that we have all of these people who are incarcerated. We have almost 1 million people who come home every year from jails and prisons and all kind of places. And the interesting thing that we've discovered is that if they get some help, they are likely, far more likely, not to return. That if they don't get any help, we know that about 2/3 of them will be back within jail or prison in 3 years. If they get help, and if the quality of that help is good, and if they get a job, many of them never see the inside of a prison or a jail during the rest of their lifetime. And so when people hear us talk about second chances, I'm very pleased to just share with you that right now, the second chance bill that we were able to get passed and that President Bush signed into law, and we thought that was pretty interesting. And the House was Republican dominated. As a matter of fact, Speaker Hastert was the speaker from Illinois. We now have 603 grantees across the country who are receiving money from those appropriations. Hopefully, we'll have at least as much money put in this year, because we're in the process of really figuring out budgets and that kind of thing. And I think we're going to do all right. Well, I'm going to mention a couple of other things. We finally, every activity that takes place in Washington has to be seriously negotiated. Everything that relates to the expenditure of money, because of these different philosophies. One philosophy saying, let's reduce the deficit. And yes, we can do that if we put our resources where they are better used and more effectively used. We can reduce the deficit. But at the same time, we are ending Black History Month, African American History Month. And the guy that I try and follow many of his precepts is a fellow named Frederick Douglass, who taught us a whole lot about life. And there are people who always want things to happen, but Douglass taught us that in order for change to come, that there are things that we want to do. He made this famous quote, saying, as they would debate the issue and the question of abolition. And there were some people who wanted the slaves freed, but every time somebody would come up with a good idea, they'd have a reason why it can't work, why it's just not going to be good. Douglass finally got a little peeved and said, you know, there are those amongst us who would profess a love for freedom and yet at the same time deprecate agitation. It means that they want the rain without the thunder and the lightning. It means that they want the crops without first plowing up the ground. He said that they want the ocean without the roar of its mighty waters. And he ultimately said there was one thing that he knew if he didn't know anything else, and that is that in this world, we may not get everything that we pay for, but we most certainly must pay for everything that we get. And so if we want a good education system for all of our children, then we've got to be willing to pay the cost. We've got to be willing to make the investment. I read the other day where Governor Quinn had emphasized a focus on early childhood education and wanted to make sure that every child in the state of Illinois got a good head start, a good opportunity to be based early in life so that they could build on that. I commend him for it, and I hope to see and look forward to seeing its implementation. The last point I will make is about the Affordable Health Care Act, something that those of us who worked intimately on it were so proud of it until we just didn't know what to do. I've always believed that we ought to have a national health plan. Everybody in, nobody out. And I know that there are those who disagree with that approach, but that's all right. This is the United States of America, and one of the things that we have the opportunity to do is to dream. And Langston Hughes said, hold fast to your dreams, for if dreams die, life becomes as a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. And so, yeah, I dream of a national health plan where everybody gets the care that they need. We're some distance away from that, although there are many other countries who've found a way to do it, but we haven't found the way. But I tell you, the Affordable Care Act that we were able to get passed comes closer to that than anything that we've ever had, and more than anybody hardly, except those individuals who keep dreaming, thought we'd ever have. And that is the opportunity for more than 30 million people, and perhaps even more than that, to experience the idea that they have a medical home, a place they can go, and they're not going to be shut out because of not having money. I mean, I am so thrilled and delighted. And I saw Carmen Velasquez a moment ago, and I'm so much into this whole notion of the community health centers, the federally qualified health centers, as a real movement towards that kind of acquisition, until I went over to the Miles Square Health Center on Friday and enrolled as a patient. And that's where I will be getting my individual health care. They've developed one of the state-of-the-art facilities. Nothing like it have I seen any place in the country. So I salute them and the University of Illinois because it's a part of their vast system. And so I go in there with confidence. As a matter of fact, I came home the other day with a bag full of pills. And my wife said, "What are you getting ready to do, open your own drugstore?" I said, "Well, you know, at my age, you need all the help you can get." And so I've got a great primary care doctor over there who says, you know, you need a little bit of this, you need a little bit of that, you got to follow things, and you can just keep on living for a long time. And I happen to believe him. So with that, we are making progress. We really are. For those individuals who don't believe progress is being made, it just means that they don't quite understand where our nation has been. They don't understand what it was like to perhaps go to school 5 months a year when they were growing up. They don't know what it was like to graduate from high school where you never had a gym to play basketball. They don't know what it was like that the first school bus you ever rode on was a flatbed truck that a man built a cabin on and put some benches on it. They just don't know where America has been. They don't know what America was like when some men sat in the room and said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men," and they meant men, "are created equal," and women were left out of the equation totally. They don't know what it was like to be a slave in the South, especially where you was counted only as 3/5 of a person as the Constitution was being put together. So we've come, although we have much further to go, a mighty long way as a state, as a city, as a nation, but we still have further to go. But I believe in the words of what we call the Black National Anthem, that we all should wake up every day with the feeling and the knowledge that we are facing the rising sun of our new day begun. And let us, Chicagoans and Illinoisans and residents of this great area, march on, Larry, until the victory is won. So thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions, of course, after that eloquent speech. We have the usual beginning softball. Graham Grady, where are you? I'll read this verbatim, just to embarrass you. Mr. Congressman, please tell us about your parents who obviously raised a wonderfully talented, caring, and capable son. By the way, I live in your congressional district.
All right.
If you can't suck up at the City Club, you can't suck up anywhere.
Well, I've actually got 2 sons, and I've got so many godchildren that I can't count them up. As a matter of fact, I never have to buy aftershave lotion because, you know, but both my sons are adults. Both Jonathan and Stacy. We have what I guess one would call a blended family because my wife actually had a son before we were married, and I had a son. They are both doing well and doing all right. And so now I have people who sometimes claim to be my sons. my daughters and nieces and nephews and other relatives that I quite frankly don't always know. But most of them who do that, I can trace my relationship with their parents or somebody that I've been associated or affiliated with. And many of the people from the little town that I came from, some of their children and grandchildren will identify themselves as a niece when they're really cousins, or as a nephew when I went to school with their daddy, or we were classmates in Sunday school and things like that. But they're all wonderful, and we take great pride in them and great pride in them living their lives to the fulfillment of what they're willing to put into it. That's what you really get out of it.
Your parents, Congressman, tell us about your parents.
Most wonderful people that the good Lord ever put on the face of the earth. As I indicated, I grew up in rural Arkansas. My daddy was a sharecropper, a farmer, who finished the 4th grade when he was 19 years old. But he also turned out to be one of the most gifted individuals I've ever encountered. I have seen him do things like amputate a calf's leg without ever having any veterinary training at all. The calf jumped through a wire fence, cut her leg, it set up gangrene. It was during the month of August, and we actually saw parasites in the calf. And he said, look, boys, we got to save this calf. And we're wondering how he was going to do it. He got himself some ashes and soot and chloroform and coal oil, put his axe in a fire and got it red hot, waved the chloroform across the calf's nose, had my brother Jesse and I to hold the calf. He cut the leg off, wrapped it up with all the stuff he had. The calf lived, and ultimately we sold her at an auction for $175, but we were the only people in southeast Arkansas who had a 3-legged calf. Great guy. He spent his last 5 years living here in Chicago with my sisters and brothers and I, and on the weekends, wherever I went, he went. Whenever you saw me on the weekend, he would be with me. He ultimately died. He was 92 years old. He was in D.C. for a Black Caucus function, got sick that Saturday, went to the hospital that Monday and died that Wednesday, so he had a good time. And we all had a good time with him. My mother was the most gentle woman I've ever known. She helped everybody she would come into contact with. I never shall forget her sending me over to a lady's house who was sick with a pot of soup, and she put a towel over the soup and then put the lid on top of the towel and told me to take it to Cousin Florence. And I was riding a mule, and so I'm trying to, and she said, don't waste any of it. So you better not. And I managed to get at least half that pot of soup over to Mrs. Florence, but she was just an angel who would whip you, corporal punishment. They believed in it, and she would be whipping you, but she'd be laughing all at the same time. And, we'd be amazed. She said, well, I'm only doing it because I love you. And it's about time that you got one so that you didn't get unruly. And that's when I came up with the theory that the best way for a minority to really handle a majority is to keep them in as much fear as you possibly could. And that's why in some states and all, they have such oppressive laws and have had them against African Americans because African Americans were the biggest part of the population. If you go back and check the history, more than half the population in some of those states, even when we first started taking the census, were black people. And so those states, when they were controlled by other people, said we just got to oppress these people as much as we can. We can keep them in order. Allah, I won't even mention the name of the states, but I know a little bit about them.
Not a bad answer, huh? By the way, you got that all on tape because this video, that's just great stories. Is that why you became a Democrat? If you were riding an elephant, you'd be Republican?
Let me tell you, I rode a giraffe. I rode a giraffe in Africa. I also rode one in the Middle East. And getting up, I rode a camel in the Middle East. We were in Jerusalem. And, you know, when a camel gets ready for you to get on, it sounds like all of the bones in his body are cracking. And I said, oh, Lord, am I going to really try to do this? I said, well, if you're in Rome, do as the Romans do. So I got on up and had a good ride. Good ride.
Well, we're running late, and by the way, your chairman also knows how to suck up. So the last question will be from Charlie Gardner, who just happens to be a trustee at Roosevelt University. Pure circumstance and pure luck. I mean, no favoritism at all. Mr. Congressman, don't you think convicts that have been rehabilitated felons should have their opportunity to regain full citizenship and the right to vote and work in government?
Well, you know, first of all, I have to say something about Roosevelt University.
Go right ahead, sir.
Because it's had a long history of being just a top flight educational and social institution. As a matter of fact, a young fellow stopped me on the street one day and asked if I had ever gone to Roosevelt, and I did take some classes, but my wife actually got her master's degree at Roosevelt. And I said, well, yeah, I took some classes. He said, yeah, I hear how you and Harold Washington and Gus Savage used to be student leaders. And I said, I appreciate the company, but when Harold Washington and Gus Savage were at Roosevelt, I was still in Arkansas. I said, I wasn't even there or here. But yes, I do believe in second chances for individuals who have run afoul of the law. As a matter of fact, there are so many productive people who, if they could get those barriers lifted in terms of, you know, we are a nation that talks about redemption, where we're basically a Christian nation. And at the base of Christianity is this notion of redemption. You know, songs, if you don't believe I've been redeemed, follow me down to Jordan's stream, and all of these things. Thank God I'm not what I used to be. And so millions of people in this country have barriers preventing them to just simply access the basis of life. We're working on something right now that I hope we'll be able to introduce pretty soon, especially given the fact that the Senate is serious about it, and that's creating something called good time for federal inmates, so that they right now have to serve 85% of their time. There are individuals languishing in federal prison who've gotten too old to do anybody any harm. There are individuals who need something called compassionate release. I remember one incident where I was able to get a notorious policeman out of prison. He had had both his legs amputated, and his grandchildren, he had been convicted of drug trafficking, and his grandchildren came and asked if I would help them bring him home to die. And we went through the processes and all, and ultimately he was in fact released to their custody and their care. And about 6 or 8 months afterwards, he did in fact die. And every time I see one of them, I was driving down the street and a guy was chasing me in a car. And finally he got ahead of me and stopped and pulled his car over to the curb. I said, my God, what in the world is this? He jumped out and said, look, says, I'm Rick Miller's son. And I just want you to know that our family will always be indebted to you for getting our father and grandfather out of the penitentiary so that he could die at home with us. And so, yes, I do believe that there are opportunities for us to display a level of humanity that sometimes we do not do. And I'm looking forward to working with the Senate. I'm quite frankly working with them right now to try and help create this good time bill. And I think it has a reason to believe that we'll ultimately get it done because Senator Leahy, who is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and my good friend Senator Rob Portman, a Republican, are the spearheads right now of this effort, and I think we're going to be able to get it done.
Round of applause for the congressman.
All right.